Chapter 11 key points. Class size is an important part of, makes it very difficult for individualized instruction during a student's time in special education classroom. Sometimes the class size is just absolutely too big, or they're understaffed, not enough paras, not a strong enough teacher. On page 174, it talks about clearly differentiated and individualized instruction. This can happen where there are good teachers and reasonable numbers in a classroom. Most students are there, but can't receive it if class sizes are too large. It's very difficult to do differentiated and individualized instruction and to work on individualized goals at times. So it made it very difficult. The other thing that caught my eye was quality of teachers is a key factor in how effective a special education program is. The quality of teachers I saw at the agency I worked for was SIGM quality. They were from bachelor's degree in journalism and business, taking this program or other programs, very limited experience with people with disabilities, and were basically taught to teach people to comply rather than to teach students to learn. So quality of teachers is a very effective, it's a shortfall and from my perspective. I think as a shortage of teachers affects teacher ed programs too, special ed programs, because you find students getting forced into a program rather than getting what they need. Let's load up the program because we don't have anywhere else to put the kid. Varying teaching tactics can have both negative and positive effects on students. This I agree. Boot style, which isn't my style, or loving and caring, which is my style. Based on special ed being drawn about some specific lines on socio-economic lines, loving and caring style teaching seemed to be most appropriate as kids needed to know they had some place to connect. The other part that caught my eye is that many schools, is once a kid's identified as needing specific instruction or restrictions, it's difficult to get the school or anyone else to realize that, hey, maybe we can do something different. Although I had several students that, one example was I wanted a computerized program for him in the beginning of the year to work individually on multiplication and division and balancing numbers in textbooks. I was shunned and laughed at. He's actually doing multiplication tables and excelling because we refused to accept what previous teachers had said. And then it seems as though, although getting a student integrated back into the general education is supposed to be the goal, that sure isn't happening where I was working. It was never mentioned. It was never talked about at teachers' meetings. It was never talked about with gen ed teachers. It was, they can go to music and recess and noon and we'll call it gen ed time, but it's not. It was a trick. Administrators wanting to keep up their school test scores are reluctant to let good teachers put their students back into the mainstream. I think that's very true, is that if I have a special ed student in the classroom, the gen ed teacher is impacted, the school's impacted, and they're going to do their best to keep them at the end of the hall. Overall, special education has a very low exit rate due to a variety of different reasons. The easiest time for students to exit the program is middle school, which very few students do. In the adult world, every time I encountered someone from a disability walking out of an institution, it was, what do we do to make them independent and be like everybody else? In an educational world, as kids come into the special ed classroom, I thought very much the same. What do we need to do to get them back into general ed with their peers? Our peers are our best teachers. I encountered significant resistance to that thought and was actually encouraged not to mention it. I think the most important one, and I'd like to include race along with this one too, is the effects of low income versus high income communities. Not only communities, but individuals, and it reflects the kind of instruction that students get. In my particular classroom, there was only 1 of 10 kids that came from a middle class family. The rest of them all came from impoverished families or families with parents with disabilities, which was kind of an indicator that if you presented differently in the community, your kid didn't end up in special ed. Out of 10 kids in my students, probably only 5 needed to be in special ed. The rest of them were there because of who they were, not what they were intellectually. So